Breastfeeding a newborn can be wrought with challenges. How do you succeed? That and a lot more on this episode of All Things Women's Health. I'm an obstetrician gynecologist of 30 years. I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a grandfather, I'm a small business owner, I'm a Catholic, I'm a lot of things. But right now, I'm your host as we talk about really all things women's health. Everything from infertility to childbirth options, from menstrual issues to mammograms, homeschooling curriculums to personal trainers. It doesn't matter. If it affects women and their health, it's on our agenda and always presented from an authentically Christian Catholic perspective. And our agenda today includes breastfeeding, a topic that can pose tremendous challenges to a new mom, especially to a new family, in so many ways. And it doesn't have to be that challenging. And I've got with me today a very close friend and expert, Hallie Greider. Hallie is the owner of Birth Matters. Her website is birthmatters.com. She teaches childbirth classes for the Holy Family Birth Center. She teaches breastfeeding classes and a lot more, as you will see. She is an expert on all things breastfeeding education, and I'm so happy to have her with us today to talk about this important topic. So, Hallie, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's so wonderful to be here with you.
I hope you really mean that.
I do. It's such an honor. You're famous.
Oh, hardly.
So
infamous, maybe. But so let's start with a fun topic, one that you're an absolute expert, one of many that you're an absolute expert on. You. Tell us about the wonders of you. How did you end up sitting here, among other things?
I love education. I was trained as a Spanish teacher, and so that was my first step into the world of teaching people. Mm-hmm. And I then had my first child of 5. I have 5 children, and as birth is, it was transformative, and in so many ways, and so many different pathways and ways that it can be transformative. And I knew immediately that I wanted to be in that world. I was so lucky to have had high-quality education prenatally, and I felt like I happened upon it. Mm-hmm. And it really impacted me that it changed my birth experience and made it so much more of what I didn't even know I wanted until I'd been through those classes, that I didn't understand why it wasn't the default for everybody.
Oh, sure.
And I felt just really passionate about becoming educated in that world and being able to transfer that information to people. So I became a birth doula and wanted to learn all about birth by being there, and then stepped into focusing primarily on education.
And then, you said childbirth education first, and as we mentioned, you run a fantastic childbirth education company, but where did your interest really in breastfeeding education, was it born out of that, or how did that come to be?
It's a compound component. Really, it's a unified component of all that prenatal education. Yeah. And we're not a breastfeeding culture in the United States. And the same way that I didn't know that I could do the things that I did in my birth experience, I didn't know just growing up in the United States that really I could breastfeed successfully. It's the same lack of natural expectation and the normal world in which we live, that breastfeeding is attainable, successful, enjoyable, and so I wanted families to have, I needed that education, didn't have it, and wanted other families to be able to have it as well.
I think plenty would say, I've actually heard dads say this before, why do you need a class in breastfeeding? Isn't this perfectly natural? Why do you need a teacher to teach you how to do this? And I think it's a valid question. What do you say to that?
I think a few things. Number one, we're not a breastfeeding culture. Women's bodies, women's breasts are really primarily a tool to sell things in the United States, and not, we don't see them and live in the world of small communities with women living near each other, where breastfeeding became something that you saw and that you knew before you had to do it.
It would have been tough for a young girl to grow up and not be exposed to breastfeeding in different cultures.
Exactly. Around her aunts or her mother or other children, other children that she saw being breastfed by the women in her community.
Right.
So we don't see it, and women's bodies, again, are really, there's actually a great breastfeeding book that's titled So that's what they're for. Because you grow up in this culture, and breasts are a sexual component of life, which is a beautiful thing.
Not a food source.
Right. And you don't think about it that way. So it's a needed educational foundation. The other thing is that families don't really know what the intention is. What's the goal? What are we doing? I mean, I know I'm going to try to breastfeed a baby, but they don't know that there are guidelines and recommendations. You always hear, oh, I got to that year mark. I wanted to just hit that year, and then we were.
Right.
And so that comes from previous recommendations from the American Academy of Pediatrics about how to get the most benefits out of breastfeeding for babies. And it's changed, you know. And so families don't really have that goal in mind in the sense of an understanding of what's the year, what am I doing? And then I think to your point about instincts, I tend to say babies have the instinct to suck.
Yeah.
Moms' bodies have the natural ability to make milk.
Yeah.
And that's it. We've got to learn how to bring those things together.
It's funny. I've heard it said that breastfeeding is actually not natural, that it has to be taught. And to your point, what's changed is the culture used to teach. Mm-hmm. So if the culture is not teaching and it has to be taught, we have to have somebody like you.
Yeah.
Which I guess we could talk for days about the anthropology of that and whether it's sad or not. But it is a reality, isn't it?
And I think for men, too, it's really critical for them to be in a class situation whenever possible, to understand it and to hear it from me, from a third party, and to normalize things. We get about halfway through a class, and all of a sudden we have a relationship where I'm saying things halfway through the class that if I had said it at the beginning, people might have gotten up and walked out the door. I can say all the anatomy, I can say nipple, I can say milk duct, I can say all these things, and we talk about sex, and we talk about how to have, the impulse of or the impact of breastfeeding on sexuality and your relationship with your partners. But in the beginning, nobody was ready for that.
These are not boring classes.
No. By the end, everybody is like, amen, sister.
When I was in medical school, it was, about 150 years ago. Electricity had just come on the scene, but it was a long time ago. But there was still a big push to make people understand breastfeeding was good for the baby, better than formula. It feels like, at least in my little corner of the world, that ship has kind of sailed. We don't really have that debate anymore. Do you feel that way in the education world? I mean, do you have to spend energy on convincing people breastfeeding is a good idea?
I don't really. Especially if they're coming to my breastfeeding class, they're invested and desirous of doing that. But I do say at the beginning of class, which I do think is important, we're here for breastfeeding class, but that's not to demean or diminish the potential legitimate need for supportive sources. I'm not here to judge you. I'm not here to say that formula is evil, inherently evil. Right. I don't feel like it is.
Because sometimes it isn't an option. And we should probably call that out at the beginning.
Yes.
Because I know sometimes those of us who are big breastfeeding advocates, we can get labeled haters for the mom who can't breastfeed. And for a variety of reasons, well beyond the mom's control, she cannot breastfeed her child. Maybe there's an issue with the child, maybe there's an issue with her, or both. And that's not what we're talking about.
No, and I think that's important to lay out at the beginning of any conversation about it. So I actually have so much more that I want to talk to them about, and I need every single minute of class to do it, that I say, you're here and you want to breastfeed.
Move on.
We're moving on.
Yeah. It's funny. I mean, I can remember several interactions, but it's almost analogous in my mind to cigarette smoking. Early in my career, it was, do you smoke and how much? Whereas now, if I met a mom who said she smoked, it would catch me off guard. It's the same with breastfeeding in my practice. I say, you plan to breastfeed. It's not really a question. And if someone says no, it shocks me, which makes me think the culture needle has shifted in the right way, hopefully.
I think so.
Wow.
I think so.
Well, what do you see as, why is it hard? Why is breastfeeding difficult? Why do you need help? What makes it difficult? Because sometimes it just seems so easy. I mean, maybe analogous to childbirth. When it's easy, it's just so easy. And then there's all those other times. But what is it that makes it difficult?
You have culture in which we live, so we're living inside of that bubble.
So inhibition on the mom's part, the dad's part?
I've never breastfed minorly for a split second, exposed myself in Target when I don't do that on a regular basis. How do I breastfeed in a public space?
Yeah.
You have then, so the expectations of what others think of you, or the fear of the cultural part, the eyes that are on you. Then you have your own insecurities, nervousness, fear. Most of the time, women particularly have heard the stories coming down the pike from their family, so they're carrying maybe some anxiety or stress from
It's
their
going to be
family.
painful. You're going to fail.
All of it.
Those things.
All of it. From their mothers or grandmothers or other women in their lives, which are not illegitimate necessarily statements from those women.
Yeah.
But the question always comes around, and I know I'm taking it off a little bit, but when someone says they couldn't breastfeed or didn't make enough milk, there's a lot of conversation that has to come about that, because that's physiologically possible, but it's not as common as you hear that statement.
Right. It usually means unsupported, or at least not properly supported.
No, unsupported, uneducated.
Well, I mentioned, the fear that it's going to hurt. Let's talk about that, kind of get that out. Does breastfeeding hurt? And is it normal if it's uncomfortable at first?
The baby's mouth is only so big, and that nipple needs to get pulled back and get more protected. It's not meant to be nipple feeding, tiny little mouth. It's breastfeeding.
Yeah.
And so there can be some, I like to use the word sensitivity, that's completely normal as we allow that mouth to grow and that ability for that baby to take it deeper latch. So there can be. I tell moms that if you latch that baby on and you take a big deep breath and kind of count to 10, that you're looking for a change. You're looking for less sensitivity. And pain is really difficult to quantify.
Right.
Every woman feels something different and uses that word for something different. So can it progress to damaging her body? Absolutely. And then we are clearly getting into the
And we
world
hear
of
those
pain.
stories of cracked, bleeding nipples and horrific pain and thrush and all of these other issues. But that's outside the norm.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that the pain can increase quickly when the latch isn't understood and the positioning of the baby isn't understood. And that will take a mom pretty darn fast from any kind of sensitivity and normal feelings of what it's like to have a latched baby on your breast to starting that damage.
Wow, interesting. I can think of a specific young woman. I believe she was Amish. I think she was about 16, and I was at her birth. And, you sort of placed the baby on her. As I recall, she sort of grabbed the baby, put it to breast, and went on some other conversation with her parents. And I'm thinking, how does that even happen? But she probably grew up seeing that happen. But there's something about fear. We talk a lot in natural childbirth education about fear is the enemy. Knowledge is the antidote to fear. But it seems like the absence of fear and the absence of insecurity and those things, somehow the women that are easily successful early on, those things aren't at play.
That's a great point, but I think there are probably some women for whom that is in their DNA.
Oh, sure.
But I think that there's probably more women who have that level of fear, but can conquer it, move through it with support. That's what has to happen. You can have those fears and concerns and worries about it, but if you have, it's like a birth doula. It's like when someone looks at you and someone's in labor and their eyes go and they just go like this, and you just look at them and you say, "You're doing it. Yes, you can." That has power. So that fear can be experienced, but moved through when there's a lot of support around that breastfeeding mom.
So you've used that word support a bunch of times. I think of the common scenario. It's 3 a.m. on night number 1 of parenthood. It's always 3 a.m.
Mama.
Right? It's never 3 in the
I love that,
afternoon.
Mama.
It's 3 a.m. Mom and dad have not slept in probably 24 plus hours by the time labor has happened, right? And the baby is screaming at levels the parents never thought humanly possible. Maybe the windows are breaking from the decibels.
Oh.
And it's this sort of moment of truth. And if there is a mother or a grandmother or a mother-in-law that says, that's not working, just give me the baby, I'll give it a bottle. I've always felt like it's over if that happens, as opposed to what you just said. If there's somebody there that says, this is fine, this happened to me, let me help you, let me take the baby a few minutes, let me show you a trick.
Need?
Yeah.
What do you need?
Yeah.
That's a great example. First of all, that family unit has to have had an anticipation of a moment like that. And that comes from a class or an educational experience, right? They've said, okay, here we are. We knew we were going to get here. We're going to have some moments like that.
Yeah.
First of all, I would say, welcome to parenthood. Like, that's just the beginning.
We could do another show on
We could do
just
all
on
of that.
parenthood.
Yeah, you're just starting that.
Yeah.
But it's really critical for them to have talked about breastfeeding, learned about it, read about it, class, understand timing, what to do, what to expect, so that when that happens, it's not the first time they've seen themselves in that situation.
Yeah.
Because when you are, I like to say in class, sleep deprived is really, for me, the foundation of what really can make a vulnerable family crack. And sleep deprivation, and I say it seriously, it's part of torture. Like, you sleep deprived people.
That's why they do it.
Yes. So you have to know you're going to be in that vulnerable position and plan for it, and have to have the map that you know you're going to use. And part of that map is anticipating those secondary family members. How is my mom going to react? How's your mom going to react? What are we going to say? How do we include her and make her feel important as part of the family unit, but create our own family unit and have our vision of how we're going to raise, feed, and care for this child. So it's part of what we do in almost every class naturally is there's a little counseling in there. There's a lot of counseling in there. The more I teach, the older I get, the more I want to say, this is the beginning of you having your vision and your voice, and it can be
It just starts there. It'll be, where do we go at Christmas and Thanksgiving? The story doesn't stop there.
We talk about all that. Yes.
But so when I hear a young woman say that she's having trouble on that first postpartum day, she probably means the baby's not latching or not latching well in her mind, or it's hurting. But what, in the perfect arrangement, what has to happen in those first 24 to 36 hours? Because, the mother's milk doesn't come in right away.
Thank you.
About 3 days in some cases.
Yeah.
Why would that be? There's no design flaws. So the baby's incapable of getting a lot of milk in the first 24 to 36 hours.
Mm-hmm. And simultaneously, the biological planned reason for that is because on day one, the size of their stomach is the size of a marble. So that's the first thing, is if you have people around you saying on day one, day 1.5, that baby's hungry, that baby needs quantity. You have to know quantity of a marble is not that's not a bottle necessarily quantity.
And I think it's so confusing because if you give that baby a bottle, they will take it all. And it all comes back on your shoulder, but they will take it all because that's just their reflex. That's a life-saving reflex to take. Mm-hmm. But yet they're not designed to take that.
They are not designed to take it. And that's one of the things that we talk about in terms of myth versus reality. You potentially are set up for someone in the first 24 or 36 hours to be saying that baby's not getting enough. Now, there are medical reasons why we might have to do some supplementation, but outside of that, their stomach is a size that colostrum, which is the first milk, is made to sustain. And I love the idea that you say it doesn't come in. My phrase is it comes to volume. You have colostrum. You have breast milk. It needs to come to volume to match the growth of that stomach, but it's not happening in 24 hours.
That's an interesting position or thing to have families understand is, what's success look like in the first 24 hours? And how would you describe that? If someone were explaining to you what's happening, how would you say that's successful in the first 24 to 36 hours?
A lot of time physically together, a lot of time skin to skin. There's so much happening in the baby's brain and the mom's brain and the dad's brain when they are skin to skin and they're smelling each other and feeling each other. Good latches, which you are learning what that mouth should look like. You've practiced in my class or a good breastfeeding class, and you are seeing that happen, and you're starting to see the transition of them moving that milk, and stimulating and pooping out, and the poop starts to kind can kind of change maybe in 24 hours, but not too much.
Yeah.
But I think there aren't probably in that first 24 hours as many markers that you can check a box on as it is knowing that you have this little kind of vacuum of time where you're going through all the things you've taught, you're latching the way you know, you're being physically close to each other, and you're stimulating your breasts are going to continue to volumize that milk, and then you're going to see in short order the results of those first 24 hours.
But if you think about it, that's not much of a checklist for the first 24 hours.
No.
Not really. Holding the baby close to you, getting them to latch, imperfect to less imperfect to maybe perfect, but not a lot of stuff. So, I mean, the corollary to that is when I walk into that room and they say, we're having breastfeeding trouble, you know, the analytical part of my brain says, well, that's impossible unless you've refused to hold the baby, right? So what do you think they mean, or what do you think they're thinking when they say, I'm having trouble in the first 24, 28, 30 hours? A latch, most commonly. They don't like the latch. It doesn't seem right.
Where are those people?
Well, that's probably a good point, isn't it?
That's what I want to know.
That's in the hospital population. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So in a birth center or a home birth, you're not seeing that same response.
Well, I would argue it's impossible because they can't leave the birth center until the midwife is convinced that they know what they're doing, everything is okay, the baby's got a latch, and everybody's comfortable with it. So it almost couldn't happen in a birth center setting. And then they come back the very next day for a baby check, and so that's a chance to check it again. But it's usually in a hospital setting. And so that makes me think, answer to my own question, that the idea has sort of been planted by the system almost, that sort of somehow is judging, saying, that's not so good. It's not working right.
This takes us on a little bit of a tangent, but I feel like since you're saying they're in the hospital when you're seeing that face.
Yeah.
And they're having contact with the people in the hospital, the nursing staff or maybe the lactation staff or someone who's around as their closest point of contact. I think you're right, which is that it's a different mindset foundationally. I think they're there for all the right reasons. I think they want to support those moms. They want to encourage breastfeeding. They want to encourage breast milk production, maybe to be a little more clear.
Yeah.
And they're thinking about that. And I think there's probably a default to a certain extent that there are going to be problems. I think it's just the attitude of, when's the shoe going to drop?
Yeah.
We know it's going to drop. It's just how and when.
From a kind of a higher level, it's almost like a wellness versus a sickness model. Hospitals, for all of the good they do, they're built on a sickness model. So to your point, we're waiting for the shoe to drop that's negative. This baby's going to get into trouble, that sort of thing.
Yeah, which thing is it going to be, as opposed to everything looks great. Yeah. You're looking great.
What about that early baby, especially with a first-time mom, that latches poorly, doesn't seem very enthusiastic about the latch, is crying constantly, doesn't seem to be consolable? She's going to say there's a problem, because if you give that baby a bottle, they stop crying.
Correct.
Because they have to swallow. So, but how do you console and educate that family through that tough moment?
I'm going to take you on a tangent also again, I'm sorry, but the recommendation around them tends to be what you were suggesting with the grandmother, that parent's mom. Like, let's give that baby a bottle, right? Or let's give that baby some donor milk. Or
they will stop crying.
Let's feed them, right? And I think the motivation behind those recommendations is one that is built a little bit on the fact that those people aren't going to see that baby on a daily basis multiple times. So a nurse in a hospital or a pediatrician is going to have a longer chunk of time before they see that baby again. So their concerns rise to supplementation more quickly because they don't know what's going to happen in the next 24 hours or 5 hours or 10. So I'll say to families, to take you back to your original question, if you have that recommendation coming from somewhere, you need the person that's right by your side for the short-term, which is a lactation specialist. Yeah. You need to have them talking to you, available for a Zoom, looking at your latch, weighing that baby in really short distances of time, because it could be dangerous to go a week and not have anybody see that baby. But not an hour. Yeah. But not 5 hours, or let's talk to this afternoon and see where everything is.
Yeah, that's interesting. So we'll open up another Pandora's box because it's fun. What's your personal feeling about pacifiers with that fussy, tough baby, especially in those early hours, early days, I guess I should say?
Man, pacifiers, it is a polarizing topic.
We might as well talk about circumcision.
Oh, goodness gracious.
Right. It's tough.
I teach everything from without my personal vested opinion because it's really important to my job is to open up that angled lens and let them see so many choices. And also when they're with me, they don't have that baby yet. So they don't know what it's going to feel like to hear that crying or to deal with something when the baby's in the car or to, what do I do with a pacifier? So what I tell them really about pacifiers is you do have to look at the research, which suggests that it's helpful for SIDS. It can reduce the risk of SIDS, which is interesting. I know it's on their list of recommendations.
Hard to connect those dots, but
it is,
yeah.
But it's there.
Yeah.
And then you have to look at how it makes sense that moms are incredibly stressed by the crying. You're biologically wired to want to do anything to stop that crying.
We all feel that way.
Oh, you can't. And then I would say my major concern from the breastfeeding perspective is don't mask hunger. It's really important not to start with that unless you're just like, I got to get to the car and then we can, get the baby home and in the house and nurse. Right. Or we can sit in the back of wherever I am in the store and we can nurse. Don't lose a feeding. That concerns me because you pacify. That's from my educational perspective, that's my major concern.
Yeah, from my limited perspective, through the years with my own kids and with everybody else's kids, it seems like there are babies that are hungry and that are babies that are just not in a good mood. And that desire to suck, it's sort of like scratching that spot in the middle of your back. It's that reflexive, and then the upturned finger even in their mouth, you could just sort of see them go, ah.
Right.
And they're not getting any nutrition, so it must not have been hunger. It must have been, I just want to
high needs baby.
Yeah, I want to be pacified. I remember my grandmother called them foolers. Yeah.
Yes.
I haven't heard that much in the Midwest, but yeah, she called them foolers because that's really what you're doing. But I like the way you said, don't substitute that for a feeding. So a hungry baby should be fed.
Yes.
But a fussy baby that needs to be consoled, that might be a comfort measure.
You need to decide how you feel about that. And most of families don't know how they feel until they have that baby. I know plenty of families that were like, I'm always sticking that pinky in there. I'm not going to use a piece of plastic. That's not comfortable for me. It doesn't fit my vision. Yeah. Other people say, I feel good about it. It helps give me 5 minutes to get the diaper change without screaming or, whatever it is. So I don't think that it's inherently evil. I think that families have to decide how they want to use it, if they want to use it. And then the thing is, if you're using it unexpectedly in a way you didn't anticipate, it's really not to beat yourself up about that. It's important that you've made the right choice in the moment with the real baby that you have and the real circumstances that you have to decide how you want to do it.
I think the term nipple confusion often gets confused there.
Yes.
Because that's about a baby sucking on something that isn't its mother's breast and getting nutrition.
Yes.
And then sucking on the mother's breast and getting nutrition.
Correct.
They get confused.
Yeah.
And the bottle's much easier.
No.
And they're kind of lazy.
It's really a misleading title. It's not confused. It's a preference.
I like it. Because they're lazy. Yeah.
I say all the time, you give that baby a bottle, you tip them back and you fill them. It's like Thanksgiving.
Right.
Do we overfill our plate?
Right.
Do I go back for seconds?
Yeah.
Yes. Some babies are tripped by that and don't want to just struggle to have the patience that it takes to breastfeed and to take the time that the hormones and all the signalers have to move through the body.
And a temperament phenomenon with that child. Yeah.
Who's like, hey, what?
But it could vary by child to child. Yeah, some maybe not set off by that. Others.
And that's the only thing about that would be, in terms of a class and recommendation, is that's why we talk about delaying bottles as long as you can, because you don't know you have a baby that's been tripped by that until you have one.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So let's delay it a little bit. Let's get them really used to breastfeeding at the breast and you used to feeding at the breast, and then we can navigate how that plays out.
And I think it's interesting. It can go the other way. I mean, to ask any breastfeeding mom, when she suddenly decides, okay, now I'm going to give the baby a bottle, and they refuse to take it because they're not used to it. They don't like it. It's not mom. Forget it.
Absolutely.
So it can go both ways.
It does. And there are tips for that. Have dad do it, have grandma do it, have mom be out of the house. So yeah, you really do have it on both sides of the
Let's
coin.
do more myth busting while we're on a roll. Talk about weight loss. You referenced that in passing, a baby losing weight.
Yeah.
Natural weight loss versus not so natural weight loss. How does that work?
Yeah. Babies are born at a certain weight, and they're going to lose about 7 to 10% of that initially, and then they start back on their up curve, and passing that birth weight is an important threshold for pediatricians, and it shows, especially if mom's body is doing well, there's no nipple pain, it starts to show, mom and the family.
And you're looking for that birth weight regain
Yeah.
in the 10 to 14 day range.
I'd say 2 to 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're looking for them to
14
cross that
plus.
threshold. Yeah. One important component of that is if mom has had a lot of fluids during labor, that can increase her fluid levels and also babies. And so some babies who are born in that situation drop more than 7 to 10%.
They're artificially heavy.
There you go.
Right.
And
Because they diurese or pee off all that weight.
Yep. And then you're going to have potentially a pediatrician who says, this baby has lost more than that. This is a danger. And there goes a supplementation because I'm not going to see you for 2 weeks.
And we should point out, a mom maybe in a hospital birth with an epidural will have gotten many, many bags of IV fluids in addition to anything she's taking in. So she could be fluid overloaded, as could be her baby, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
and
that's a
there
great point.
Families that don't know that. So we talk about the idea that if you're in that category when you're giving birth, maybe having a couple of weight, a little scatter plot of some weights to kind of, and to be aware of the possibility that they might lose more than what the pediatrician is feeling comfortable with just on paper.
Oh, good point. Back, I guess I forgot to mention when we were talking bottle, no bottle, those early days of breastfeeding, it almost feels like, and I live in a hospital world much more than you do, but it almost feels like we did such a great job explaining the nutritional benefits of breast milk that we let the pendulum swing too far, and the system, the overall healthcare system, is much more interested in the baby receiving breast milk than breastfeeding. And I think it would be easy to say, who cares? We learned all those antibodies are important. They should eat breast milk. Who cares where they get the breast milk? But it feels like that's wrong. What does that make you think when you hear me say that?
Well, I want to say first that there are amazing moms who do face legitimate struggles, and the only way that they can get the breast milk into the baby is by exclusive pumping
or donor milk.
Right. Yeah. So those are legitimate, and that's a really important win for those moms and a huge sacrifice of time and effort and energy. So that's important. The flip side of that, though, is there are more moms who end up finding themselves in that category erroneously, not for those legitimate reasons.
Sure.
And that's where it becomes problematic, is that they end up feeling, I think, that they need to say that, or that's really the explanation that they need for their heart, because the circumstances were not as supportive as I think they probably needed to be.
Which I think sets them up, especially a first-time mom, to feel like a failure.
Oh, yeah.
My body failed me. I couldn't breastfeed. I'm supposed to breastfeed. Everybody knows that. And I couldn't. So she's already entering a vulnerable postpartum period, feeling a bit beaten up. That's if her birth went really well. And if her birth didn't go well, now she's already down.
Yes.
And now we've told her, actually, you're not a very good breastfeeder.
Right.
Not a great combination.
No. And I don't remember where I read it, but at one point I read a really great article that talked about women feeling like successful mothers. And at the top of that list was the ability to calm and soothe your baby and the ability to feed your baby.
Yeah.
And that is a benchmark for feeling like a mother, and the word that
the mountaintop experience there.
Yes, what that means for her. So it's, I think that it's, again, probably a system around them that is wanting to make sure that they make milk, which is good, but there's been a loss of, like you say, the importance of trying to give that mom the best chance to at least have some component of actual breastfeeding or a full amount of breastfeeding. I also think that the people who give those types of messages, they they probably feel that they're supporting them.
Right. They're doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Their motives are probably good.
I think they are. They forget what it's like to walk out of that experience and into the rest of what that family unit has to
I think
face.
it's analogous to the birth experience. Who cares? You had a healthy mom and a healthy baby, check the box. What difference does it make? But you and I know it makes a tremendous difference in how the family moves beyond that into the next phase. And so this is just a continuation of the whole birth experience and how the family feels or doesn't feel.
Right.
Which can be devastating.
Oh, absolutely. And I think another parallel between that is how the family gets to the decision or the intervention in a birth or the impact in their breastfeeding and being able did it happen via really supportive, informed decision making where people listened to you and helped you the best that they could? Or do you realize later that there were things that could have been done and should have been done that nobody talked to you about? That's when you feel duped and undermined by a system or...
And that creates trauma, emotional trauma.
Absolutely.
Because we've said it before, but it's probably worth calling out again. There are going to be moms who do everything right. They took your class twice, and for whatever reason, they're not producing enough milk or their child is not doing well with that milk, and they need donor milk, they need formula, they need something to be safe, and that's not a judgment thing. That's a misfortunate medical event.
Yes.
But we're not talking about those moms.
No.
So if you're being made to feel like you're in that situation, you should be made to understand that from someone you trust, and it should make sense, right?
Yes. You take the steps through the process of getting to that same spot without any real individualized information, with just the standard boilerplate experience or the standard recommendation to supplement or get this, without really looking at you and seeing, is this the only way? If it is the only way, then you move towards the donor milk, you move towards the formula or combination. But it needs to be that family, that mom really feels that she got to do everything she could. Right. We can control things and we can't control other things. And it's important that she gets the chance to control what she can and see what that outcome would be versus having people ignore that and just kind of sweep her into the fast track.
Yeah, I like that. Another scenario that I've seen, I know you've encountered this as well, is the mom thinks it's just not going well. I don't think baby's getting enough. He acts hungry. He does hunger cues. I watched the video on hunger cues. He's got them all. But I breastfed him. So I pump to see how much is coming out. And then she uses that volume as a way to say, that's not nearly enough. How do you counsel those moms?
Well, we talk about it beforehand. And when we get the pump out, we say the pump is not reflective of how much your baby takes from your body.
I feel like we should pause.
Say it again. The pump is not reflective. What you gather from a pump is not equal to what they move from your body when they're latched on there. Some women their bodies don't respond well to a pump. I was one of those women. I had to pump in a certain way at a certain time. I had to manipulate all kinds of things so that I could gather enough milk and be a doula and go to births. Some women just have a hard time with the pump. So it's really important not to get wrapped up in that. We're a visual culture.
Yeah.
And this is another thing that's important, and maybe it'll take us into other topics, but I talk about with families the first time, and specifically to dads, I say, listen, dads, you need to get up at night. Those first feedings at night. I said, I know that she has the breasts. I know that she has the anatomy, but you are both equally ignorant about what is happening. She's going to latch that baby on and she's going to go, what do you think? And he's going to, I don't know, what do you think? And I don't know, what do you think? You are equally ignorant. Right. And so you have to remember that your presence and your participation and all those things is essential because she doesn't know anything. I think men feel like, oh, well, she knows.
Yeah.
No.
But I like the way you said that. And the same thing happens in labor. At some point, she looks at her spouse and she's got this look on her face. She doesn't want to see the same look on her spouse. She wants to see, you've got this. Yeah. You're doing good. I remember from class, Hallie taught us this. Yes. It's going really well.
You need you need a second set of eyes. You need a second set of ears. You need somebody there to look at the latch and I don't know, is it deep enough? What do you think?
Yeah, that's great. I like that. I think for our children, very early on, I was relegated by the boss to transportation to and from the breast.
Moving around the room to diaper changes and things. Yeah.
But clearly the feeding fell on mom. But to your point, there's a lot dads can do. There's a lot of ways dads can not shine. So, I mean, speak a little bit to dads to be. How do you educate dads to be supportive and to be helpful in this endeavor?
A few things that come up. Physically be present. It's really important. It's a mixture of just sitting next to her during a feeding, talking about the feeding, what you're seeing, how she's feeling, and it's a great time to connect with each other. So there's a component of being with her. I think also because moms lose as much productive time as they normally are used to having, that there's maybe a list of things that need to get done. So it's a mixture then of doing and
chores.
Checking in and saying, hey, while you're nursing, are you good? I'm going to fold the laundry. Would that be a good thing for me to do at this time? We sat for a feeding, we've checked in, and now we're going to do some things. So those are good. I also think that it's important for dads to know that in those first weeks when we're delaying the bottle, that it's not about feeding physically. It could be about moving the baby, diaper changing the baby, taking care of mom, running interference with other people. It can be, and then I also like to ask dads to be the keeper of the questions. Because when you're sitting there at 3 a.m. and you say, does this seem right? If you don't remember to jot it down and you're coming back to see your provider in 24 hours or whatever, they're going to look at you and say, so do you guys have any questions?
Right.
And you're going to look at each other with this bleary-eyed face and go, I think we're good, right? I think we're good, because nobody remembers. So dads, keep the questions and then say, well, remember you asked about this and we didn't know if this was right. And so you won't forget to ask.
You know, I just had a flashback. I don't know what you triggered, but I can remember with the birth of our first child, my wife is a nurse midwife. I'm an obstetrician, been doing this a long time.
Says a lot.
We come home with a baby, and she latched our son. And I remember just looking, thinking, oh, my God.
Yeah.
This actually works.
It's amazing.
There's just something that's so amazing about that. And you mentioned getting up. I think I wasn't very good at it, but I think there's something, especially in those early days of dads, get up, be sleep deprived, look wall-eyed, because that's solidarity.
Yes.
And of course, I think a lot of families, there'll come a time where the mom will say, you're going to work tomorrow, I'm not. You go back to sleep, I'll feed. That's a division of labor.
Yeah.
But in those early hours of those early days, just get up and suffer together for all the reasons that you listed.
Once you get over that initial learning curve and mom knows some things, feels some things, has some practice, baby is doing well, her body's doing well, then you tip into that world.
And I certainly have heard moms say, I feel a little guilty about my desire to breastfeed because then that means my husband has nothing to do. Oh, that's just not true. As you pointed out, there are plenty of things to do. Run interference with relatives, manage the meal train, all sorts we could make a list that just goes on and on.
Another thing that I put on that list for dads is to just make the calls for support. I think women, and I even myself in certain situations, I don't want to bother. I don't want to call. We're going to be fine.
Yeah.
We can figure it out. And I said to dads in class, you're either going to go and see that provider and they're going to say, ooh, you got some issues here. Or you're going to go and see the provider and they're going to say, you guys are amazing. And I said, both of those pathways are worth whatever penny you paid to get in that office.
That's right.
It feels so good to have an answer either way. And you look at each other and you're like,
we did this.
We're doing it? Wow, I didn't know we were doing it, but I guess we're doing it.
Yeah. I just don't think you can understate the amazement when you realize as a husband, as a mother, your body's actually feeding this thing we made.
Yeah.
It's pretty wild.
It's incredible.
That probably deserves a pause, too.
Oh, my gosh.
Well, let's move on. More controversy. Never wake a sleeping baby. So my grandmother said.
Did she really?
I think so. It's been a long time.
Oh, my
Somebody's grandmother. It could have been my patient's. But we're into those early days, maybe early weeks, and you're trying to get a rhythm. And I think now with social media, it's almost worse than having no information because there's so much information. But you lay the baby down, they sleep. What do I do? Do I feed a baby on a schedule if they look happy and they're sleeping? Do I wake up a perfectly happy baby to sleep? How do you speak to that?
Yeah. We divide that vision of timing and by pre-crossing the threshold of your birth weight and post-crossing your threshold of your birth
Oh,
weight.
okay.
So when you're under that threshold of your birth weight and you're just learning everything about breastfeeding and who your baby is and who this
And that's that first 1 to 3 weeks.
yes,
Yeah.
those first 1 to 3 weeks, and on a quick aside, I don't like schedule. Schedule scares me. It's not a schedule. I don't love the schedule. If you are looking for sleep training, extending sleep, those things can happen, and there are lots of materials to help it that really doesn't begin until 4 months
That's
of
what I
age
was
or
gonna say.
later.
I think all of the methods of so-called sleep training
Methods.
began much later on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we're not demonizing, we're saying they just don't have a place in those first few weeks. So the first few weeks, you do have a rhythm of feeding and timing of feeding that's essential. Breast milk starts by the departure of your placenta. The drop and the shift in the hormones tell your body the baby is there. But to continue to produce and volumize and meet the need of the baby, it's all based on demand and supply.
Right.
So if you don't move the milk through your breast, if you don't demand the milk from your body on a regular basis, your body will read the production level at that amount, which is why you can feed a baby if you had a mastectomy and you have one breast, you can feed a baby fully on one breast because you can stimulate that and it will meet the need. You can feed twins because it will meet the need. So it's essential in those first weeks that we are doing a lot of frequent feeding for baby's weight gain, for mom's breast health.
Yeah.
There's a whole host of reasons why we do need to feed frequently, which, to answer your question, means we wake a baby. If they go too long, longer than 3 hours is
that
my
sounds like
marker.
a schedule.
It's not a schedule. It's a timing. It's a time frame.
But 2 to 3 hours is a stretch.
It's a stretch of time that is, when you realize also that, like, you look at the composition of breast milk and the fat levels and the amount, like, compared to a mammal that's feeding in the ocean or a mammal that's feeding a horse. Like, we don't have those numbers because they're not meant or capable of being away from you. So here's the thing I like to talk about in class is everybody says it's optimal. Breastfeeding is optimal. And it's so, and they learn from me that it adjusts in its actual makeup over time for when you feed, as well as over like this actual feeding. And so what I like to throw back at them is they digest it quickly. It's made perfectly for them. It's optimal for them. Do you know what that means? That means you're feeding all the time. That means you cannot go longer than a 2 to 3 hour time frame.
In fairness, 8 weeks, 12 weeks later, a mom would say, "Are you kidding? I can't go more than 3 hours because of engorgement." But we're talking about those early weeks when you're trying to get this back to birth weight.
No, that's the time where you're setting a foundation for all the supply and the weight gain of the baby, which is an important marker, not the sole marker, but it's good to watch how it changes. And so, it's that pre-crossing that birth weight threshold.
So you cross that threshold, you're into 3+ weeks.
Yeah.
Then what does that begin to look like?
The Wild West. I
gotta
say
figure
to
it
them,
out. Yeah.
hey, I call it the golden ticket, like the Willy Wonka. Once you get up there, you're in the golden ticket. You can talk about pumping if you're going to be going back to work.
Yeah.
You can talk about bottles if you're going to be wanting to practice a little bit. You can start to think about those things once you're up into that area. And in terms of timing, I no longer worry too much about how frequent the feedings are. You just need the right amount every 24 hours.
Yeah.
That's another thing. We never say every day. I love to do that. It's a day and night don't exist anymore.
Right.
It's a 24-hour
In so
time
many
frame.
ways.
And so it's over. Sleep's over. What's baby?
Oh my gosh. So what are some important signs other than passing that threshold of birth weight that a baby's doing well? I tend to say things like crying real tears, wetting diapers, having bowel movements. Are there other cues that you like to use to reassure a family your baby's doing well? You pass the birth weight, that's great. Then into that next phase, are there things you like for that?
Once you've got a mom whose milk comes to volume, which is around day 3, you've got a woman who can feel the milk in her breasts.
Yeah.
And that can be a helpful physical sort of
A timer
element.
almost.
Yeah. You start with a fuller breast and you end with a softer breast, and you can feel that. You know that that's happening. So that's almost an immediate sensation
Yeah.
that you can tell that the baby has transferred some milk, which is good. You're looking at the number of times they're inputting and feeding, the output, the color of the output, and how it changes
Yeah.
in that first week or so. And I like to say that you're going to have a time during the day where they're alert and just taking in the world, right? They're not always seemingly frustrated or ravenous or anything. They're going to have a peaceful kind of just, whoa, kind of from them, where they're looking at you, they're alert and awake, and they're content.
That's a happy baby sign.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Now, you mentioned pumping, and that seems important because it seems to come up outside of that concern that I think we've addressed in those early days. But for the mom who's maybe going back to work, maybe not necessarily going back to work, what is the role of pumping, and how do you begin to think about that?
It goes back to just widening that lens. Some moms who are stay-at-home moms and primarily at home with the baby most of the time or all of the time, maybe never pump. And that's fine. It really has to do with our modern world and how often and how far do you need to have distance from the baby? Do you work? Are you a part-time, full-time worker? Do you want to go on a date night?
Yeah, I mean, very, very simple. That's a big thing.
Yeah.
No milk, no date.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so it has a role that serves your family and what you need it to be. So
how does the mom plan? What does she do, practically speaking? If she says, okay, I'm going to go back to work 2 days a week, I need to get some milk so that my mother or someone can feed the baby. How does she start that? And what does she do?
I think the first thing is that once you get into that golden ticket area and you've crossed that threshold and things feel really good, then it's a very good idea to get a working mom book that's about breastfeeding and working.
Do you have one you like we can put in the program notes?
Yeah, I love Nancy Mohrbacher. She is fantastic. I love all of her writings. And she's got a working mom's book that's just fantastic. And it will just, again, create a community for them. It's a written community, but it still gives them the idea of, okay, now I'm part of a different vision for how I'm going to do breastfeeding. And it just gives her so many tips. I can't talk about that in regular breastfeeding class because we're just on that initial curve. But it's nice to start with that. And then she's really just going to work on creating a stash of milk, figuring out how her body responds to the pump, what kind of pump she has. Does she dial it down, up?
Now, practically, that's going to occur after a feeding, not before a feeding. Correct?
Yes.
So to feed the baby as always, now I'm going to try to generate some extra and save that.
Yes. And sometimes there would be reasons to maybe pump while you're feeding if you're struggling with some things, or if you're departing and you're just feeding on one breast in the morning. I know some moms that'll pump at the same time on the other morning or the other breast to keep that breast production a little bit more balanced as they start their workday and have that separation.
Now, we're not sponsored by pump makers.
No.
There's a few now. There used to not be. There's a few brands now. Do you have a feeling about pumps, one pump better than another pump, depending on the circumstances?
It's a whole crazy world. I mean,
they're very expensive, I've noticed.
They are. And insurance does more of a job covering those. So more families are getting completely reimbursed, right? And they're also getting the ability to have a double electric pump, which means you can pump both breasts at the same time. That's essential for a mom who's going back to work. So you have to look at a couple of categories. You have to look at the style. Are you thinking about a traditional plug-in dual electric pump that has been the workhorse of all time, pretty much until recently? Medella's up there,
an example
and Spectra. Those are the two brands that most moms seem to love. Then you drop into the world of all of the remote, with your phone, all of that.
For clarity, the phone doesn't do the pumping.
It doesn't. No, it controls it. It helps you. And so I have most of the time. Those are the questions: is wow, those remote pumps are expensive and great. Can I just have that? For moms that get started off and really don't have as many difficulties, you probably could just go with that one. Because of the convenience, I see why it wins out. If you have an issue with separation or a baby that maybe is struggling, or you're working on milk production, quantity, supply issues, they're not going to do the same thing.
Yeah.
So if a mom's really struggling to make those decisions, she could talk to a lactation consultant or call back her, educator and get an idea. But
And
those
as
are
you
the
mentioned,
ones.
it's probably a different scenario. If you're going to go back to work 5 days a week all day, you've got to generate 5 days worth of milk.
Yeah.
As opposed to maybe part-time. Maybe you just want a supply for, as we said, date night babysitters, things like that.
Exactly.
Interesting. Good. So we did pump brand, even though we're not sponsored. Let's move to a different topic. And I meant to touch on it earlier. How do you address some of the problems like sore, cracked, bleeding nipples or engorgement? Whether it's early or whether it's late, how do you counsel those moms?
Yeah. Engorgement is one of the first things that I think can happen, which let's just define it for people that don't know.
Sure.
The milk coming to volume takes up space and fills up the space in the breast and the milk ducts, and it can get really full to the point where it's almost like stretching a balloon as tight as it can. And the issue with that is a baby has to have some give in that breast tissue to take it in and pull that nipple back as opposed to bouncing off of it.
So what happens is the mom is so engorged she can't feed the baby.
Right.
Which
And
makes the
there's-
engorgement worse.
Exactly. It starts the cycle and the baby's not getting and we can't transfer milk. And so it's a delicate balance because if you remove all that milk and soften that breast, you've just told your body to make more milk, but you really don't need more milk. So I love to talk to families about how every time you're feeding directly from your body, you're bringing the need of the baby in harmony with what your body's producing. And that can take a little bit of time. So engorgement isn't something to send you into a panic. You're just going to try and manage it as much as you can while you're feeding frequently to get your body to adjust.
Yeah.
So you've got all kinds of crazy tricks, cool things in between. I love the voodoo of cabbage leaves.
Right.
That really does work for a varied number of reasons.
Pumping to reduce engorgement can be a double-edged sword.
I don't say pumping. I would say to hand express or softly soften the breast a little bit. Take the smallest amount out that you can.
Because pumping can generate that demand, and now you're in a vicious cycle again.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But it's a real thing that can happen.
It is. And it's good to know what it is in advance, what it feels like, what it looks like. We've got a couple of different images and pictures with those types of suggestions on them in our packet. So you go home and you're like, all right, I already know.
Yeah.
And again, that anticipation of having that knowledge means that if it happens,
We've got a plan.
yeah, we've thought about
At
it.
least we have an idea.
We know what it is.
The other topic, sore, cracked, bleeding nipples. Not normal. We should probably say right off the bat. That's not just your cross you bear.
No.
But how do you begin to address that?
First thing is that when you start to realize that you're feeling more pain and not just sensitivity, is that you really need to get some one-on-one help. You need to see a lactation specialist that you trust, that you've got good recommendations for, who can start you down the path of checking things. Number one, you want them to see your latch, and number two, which we haven't talked about, there can be some anatomy issues that it doesn't matter how long you sit and try to get that perfect latch. There are some anatomy problems that are going to continue this pain, cracking, bleeding, and it's not you. It's something that needs to be done and to support.
Important to say it's not normal.
No.
And get some help.
Yes.
And there's a lot of products. There's creams, there's ointments, there's a lot of ways to go about it. But I like the way you said that. The root cause needs to be evaluated, which may be a bad latch for a host of reasons.
Yeah.
But you opened up another Pandora's box that I'm not afraid to jump into. We take tongue tie, lip tie very seriously in our practice and have for a long time. But that's controversial.
Very.
I'm not exactly sure why. You've been doing this a while. Why do you think that's a big deal? Why do we argue about that?
I don't know. I don't know why we argue about it. I don't know if it's just the juxtaposition of the more medical model, the less medical model, hitching on to one more topic to just debate.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem like it should be
So a mom will say to me,
complicated.
the baby's not latching well, and I'll look, and there is clearly what appears to be a tongue tie and or a lip tie.
Yeah. Do
And
you want
I'll-
to define that too, by the way?
Oh, that's probably a good idea. You go first.
Well, to be able to get that deep latch, you have a position that the mouth needs to be able to
And the
take.
tongue.
Yeah. And there can be a frenulum connective tissue that's too tight, restrictive, and the one is under your top lip and the other one is under your tongue. So tongue tie, hence the name tongue tie, lip tie.
So for the tongue, a nice little test you might say is, does it reach the top of the baby's mouth when they're crying? Can you tell that it reaches there? Or does it appear to literally be tethered?
Yeah.
You know, the other one I like is, does it come over the lip? You know, when they're making hunger signs and smacking their lips, does their tongue come out? Or does it strangely seem to always stay in? Often that means that little frenulum, it's called, is too tight. And then moms, you can just sweep your finger under there and it feels like a rubber band. It's probably too much there.
Yeah.
And the same with the lip. You can feel those under the center of the lip.
How often do you see babies that have a tongue tie, lip tie issue? Like out of 10 babies, your average 10 babies that you guys you're seeing?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm a little out of touch because now our midwives treat them almost at the moment of birth. The baby comes out, they look at it, they snip it. So it doesn't get to me anymore. But I used to see it a lot more than I would have thought, was occurring. And I think the more you look and the more you listen, the more you find. But I've just never been able to justify not taking a tiny little pair of scissors and snipping that little skin. I mean, it barely bleeds, and the baby latches on. And a lot of times, and as a provider, all you have to see this one time and I think you're sold. A mom can't latch. She's dying in pain. I look at the baby. I snip that. She puts the baby to breast, and her whole face changes and says, "Oh, my word."
That's what it should feel like.
Right. So I just find it hard to believe that was a placebo effect. Something I did changed the baby's latch, and the mom is the sort of the gold standard to say that.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, there's a lot of resistance sometimes in the pediatric community, sometimes not. But it has been a challenge. I think probably if I try to put myself in their position, they would say, that's an intervention for which there is no good double-blind randomized, which I'm not even sure that's true. I know in Europe, the way they feel about tongue tie, lip tie, radically different than the way we feel about it. And humans are the same in Europe as they are in North America.
Right.
But it is a controversial topic.
It is. I did hear, and I don't know enough about the written scope of practice for an IBCLC, but I did hear that that could potentially be part of what they are not
supposed to say. Which is probably a reflection of maybe the political turmoil.
Exactly. So maybe their hands are tied and it's not, but it is controversial for sure.
I have had patients bring their baby to me and say, the lactation consultant said, to tell you to take a look at his tongue.
Yes.
That's code. That's clearly code.
They're allowed to say that. Go get a medical
But we sure
diagnosis.
see it a lot. So we mentioned the tongue coming out, touching the top of the mouth. And when the baby latches, does their upper lip flange out and sort of cover over the breast, or does it seem to curl under?
I call fish lips. That's the hand is like.
That's what you're looking for.
Yep, you want
as
that
opposed
ability.
to this, which would not be ideal.
No.
Yeah. But you talk in your classes about that. I know you do.
We do. We do, and ask them to ask their providers if they have skill set, if they do, to do it right there at the birth experience, right after baby's here, and if not, to to watch how that unfolds with their breast health, because it will start to create problems.
And I'd go a step further and say to parents, if you mention this to your provider, whether it be peds, family medicine, or OB, and you get the proverbial eye roll, go somewhere else.
Yes.
If you think there's a problem, go somewhere else.
Yes.
Let someone that doesn't feel that way tell you there is or there isn't a problem.
Correct.
I mean, I've certainly looked at hundreds of babies and said, no, actually, I think that looks normal. I don't think you have a tie, but you have to look. You have to be willing to look.
That's the key, and I'm so glad you said it that way. It's not the person who's doubtful of this being legitimate that you want to say, accept their diagnosis of no.
Right.
It's the person who does believe it's legitimate, who says, this one's not an issue.
That's a good
We've
point.
got a different set of issues.
So don't be afraid to just get up and go ask somebody else.
No, and I would say that that's a good thing just to say in general. Let's just say that in general.
Across the board in medicine, but
keep
especially on this
trusting your
topic.
instinct. Keep asking for a second opinion. It's kind of the idea with the women before, say, oh, I don't want to bother anybody. I think we struggle with the ability to advocate strongly for these little people. I mean, we've got an instinct, I think most women feel, and parents and dads feel some sort of protective component.
Right.
But when you have to look at a professional and say, I'm not going to accept that, I'm going to continue to pursue, it can be hard.
Yeah. And I like this idea of a second opinion, and I think it's important to point, and whether we're talking about breastfeeding or cancer care.
All of it.
You don't go get a second opinion necessarily to get a different opinion. I think you go to get a second opinion that may be identical to the first, but somehow that one felt better. Maybe they did a better job of explaining. Maybe they just affirmed everything the first person said. But, because the scientists might say, well, why do you believe the second one more than the first one? Did you just keep looking till you got the one you wanted? I hope not. I think what you're really looking for is getting the one you trust. And for whatever reason, the first one, it just didn't resonate. Keep asking until you get something that resonates whether it agrees with what you wanted to hear or not, it's that trust, resonation feeling that,
Brilliant. That's brilliant.
this is the right thing. And you may have to look a while, and that's okay.
It is okay.
Yeah. Well, as we sort of wind down, another topic that I didn't want to skip because this comes up a lot, I think, breastfeeding and pregnancy. This is a strange topic, but it isn't. But yet it has become a strange topic, I think.
Yeah.
And I say it that way because I see women all of the time. They've had a child, especially my fertility patients. They've had a child. They worked so hard. They're ready to be pregnant again, but they're thinking, but I've got to wean. I don't want to wean. I really like breastfeeding. Baby's doing great. How do I get out of this dilemma? And I find myself struggling to explain this isn't a dilemma, but it's a tricky thing.
Yes.
How do you talk to the parents about that?
It's you have to get there. I think that because of our culture, it's like the idea of breastfeeding a child that's over 1. We're not used to it.
Right.
And it feels inappropriate and starts to cross some sort of line that we have about what breastfeeding should be, or, that's the key word, should be.
Yeah.
And so the key is to let yourself get there and see what you want breastfeeding to be, not what it should be, but what in the real circumstance of being pregnant or pursuing a second pregnancy, what do you want breastfeeding to be? It might be that you want to come to the end of this for various reasons, and this is the right time for that. It might be that you don't. It's just that they don't know and see. It's like tandem nursing. You don't know and see that very often, and so to normalize that.
To be clear, tandem nursing would be breastfeeding the newborn and the older child at the same time.
Exactly.
Which works, but physiologically, there is no reason to stop breastfeeding if you can conceive. Now there are those, and I would say it's a minor.
Yes.
That as long as they're breastfeeding, maybe even once a day, that small amount of stimulation will suppress ovulation. Yeah. Now, to be clear, you can't count on that as a method of spacing your children.
Oh, no, don't do that.
After 56 days, ladies, you're fertile. So remember that. But it could be that unique woman is suppressed and she's not going to conceive if she's breastfeeding at all.
Right.
Other women, 4 or 5 times a day, they're ovulating regularly, they're menstruating regularly.
Yes.
There's no reason for them to stop. And then once they conceive, physiologically speaking, there's no reason for them to stop.
No.
Now, I feel like anecdotally I've seen through the years, the milk changes. It goes from toddler milk to newborn milk, and sometimes the toddler is not a fan. Yeah. And so they self-wean and go away, which is a natural phenomenon.
It is.
But from a pure medical physiologic standpoint, there's not a dilemma, right?
As long as the medical provider is telling them that they're safe with their ability to get pregnant and move through that pregnancy safely, no. Yeah. No. It's just important for me to set to plant the seed. To talk to them about things like that they've never heard before or probably seen before most of the time. Yeah. And to normalize letting them get there and see how they really feel about it. Because that might surprise them. It's with all kinds of things with parenthood. How do you feel about all types of elements?
Yeah, when I'm talking to couples about childbirth planning, I like to use the analogy of, when you bought your first used car, maybe the experience wasn't so good, so you're going to do better the next time. Wouldn't it be nice to have not messed up the first time? That's why investing some energy in education, because we just don't know what we don't know. So as we wrap up, how do people get in touch with you to learn a lot more about breastfeeding education and childbirth education? Which, by the way, you have to come back and just talk about childbirth education now that we've covered breastfeeding. But how do they reach you and learn more? Yeah,
the best way is just our website, birthmatters.com. We've got summaries of our classes on there, the ability to register on there. So anything that any family would want to know about us and the classes that we offer is there.
Absolutely, birthmatters.com. And you teach a freestanding breastfeeding class. You do a parenting class for new parents. I don't want to mess up the list.
No, we have our core classes are childbirth education, breastfeeding and newborn care for all those new parents. We do have a VBAC class for families that are coming back out of a cesarean delivery, and we do have a refresher class for families that have taken out of independent hospital or independent classes before and are ready for a little refresher.
But I think, salient to our topic in this episode, certainly people have had no trouble with their natural birth before. Yeah. But maybe they struggle a little bit with breastfeeding. They would want to take your breastfeeding class.
It's a standalone class, which is really important to us, that it could be for for any person in any birth environment.
Right.
It's not specific to a particular style of birth. It's specific to breastfeeding. Any family that wants to do that. And we really have spent so much time on the content and giving everybody as much solid resources, as many things as we possibly can.
And what's the time commitment and cost for the breastfeeding standalone?
Breastfeeding by itself is a $60 cost for one 3-hour class.
Right.
I sometimes run over maybe a little.
Shocking. Shocking.
But yeah, it's and all those dates are on there, and we're expanding and adding more.
I'll tell you, with inflation, what it is, that's a meal out. And if you take that class and master it, you'll get a lot more meals out.
Yeah.
That's the best $60 you could spend.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for sharing all of your wisdom with us. And we got it on the air. You're coming back to talk about
Anytime.
childbirth education, but it's been a great experience.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. Any big takeaway you want to leave moms and dads?
I would say trust your instinct and really enjoy the moment. I wish, this is kind of how I love to get emotional about it too. I really tried to live up to so many people's expectations and wanted to fulfill what that role looked like. And I tell people I would give anything to have spent just more time feeling the weight of them in my hands and just being with them, that is valuable to create that pathway and that memory. So you are doing amazing things when you're just with them as a family unit.
Seems like a perfect ending to a great discussion. Thanks again.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed this discussion of breastfeeding and breastfeeding education. I've certainly have enjoyed participating in it and bringing it to you. I hope you'll like and subscribe and share this podcast with everyone you know. Are there things that you'd like to hear about? I'd love to hear from you. You can message me at Dr. Stroud at fertilityandmidwifery.com. I'd love to hear your thoughts about this episode and all of our episodes. Again, I'd love to hear from you if there are topics that you'd like to cover, if there are guests that you would like me to have on the show. I'll look forward to being back soon with another episode of All Things Women's Health.